Okay, there we go, we're live. So we're gonna go ahead and start our SLO training. And then this video, guys, will be on YouTube. If you wanna go back and see whatever directions Mr. Camarillo is giving us. If there's any kind of confusion, you have any questions, you can go back and watch the video. But again, like I said, on Saturday, we're gonna go ahead and have where we're gonna help you create them and write them out. And so we're gonna go ahead and let Mr. Camarillo start. And making sure this is centered. There we go.
All right, good afternoon. I'm proud AOE member here. So don't feel the messenger. Right. All right. So before I begin, it's always helpful to know what kind of audience I'm speaking to so I know how to speak to you. I know we have one administrator in the house, but how many of us are teachers? How many of us are teachers? Current teachers in district? Great. Okay, so for all of us in here have to write an SLO, correct? I'm sure you've heard this training before. I'm sure you've seen the videos before, but we're going to allow a kind of Q&A session at the end. You're going to ask me what it is I can help you with as you progress for the year. Whenever we talk about SLOs, we have to remember what the acronyms stand for. Whenever it's just like when you go to the hospital and you go to the emergency room, you get doctors talking in medical lingo. Okay. Same thing with SLOs. When we talk SLOs, we have to talk in the terminology of the SLO in order to understand what it is that we're getting after. So before we start talking about the SLO, I want to review the lingo. Again, I'm sure you did this back home with your appraisers, but just so that we're advantaged into it right now and we're back in frame of mind of SLOs, let's do a little bit of review with the vocabulary.
The next part of the presentation will deal with a quick review of some key terms and concepts from the SLO. Let's begin with the foundational skill statement. The foundational skill statement refers to the statement a teacher creates to identify the base skill that he or she would like to focus on teaching more effectively in the upcoming year. The ISP, or Initial Skill Profile, is a rubric that the teacher creates to describe the teacher's view of what he or she thinks a student will be able to do at the beginning of the year prior to any instruction. Again, ISP is the Initial Skill Profile. The TSP, the Targeted Skill Profile. This refers to the rubric a teacher creates to describe the various levels of students after instruction has been delivered. BOE refers to the body of evidence. The BOE refers to the work or assessments a teacher collects from students to track their progress from throughout the year. Remember, the teacher must upload their evidence at each 6 weeks point so that the teacher does not feel overwhelmed at the end of the year when trying to close out their SLO. EOY rating, or end of year rating. After all evidence has been collected, the teacher gives a final rating to indicate which level of mastery the student achieved. This could range from well below typical through well above typical. The EOY rating is different from the TSP rating, or Targeted Skill Profile rating, because the EOY rating represents what the student actually achieved, versus the Targeted Skill Profile rating, which is the prediction the teacher set for the student at the beginning of the year. To calculate student growth, the teacher will compare the student's end-of-year rating to their original target, the TSP rating, and indicate whether a student met, exceeded, or did not meet the teacher's expectation set at the beginning of the year. This is the student growth calculation that will end up in the teacher's T-test summative evaluation. And finally, the SLO Success Criteria Guide. This tool is to be used as a guide to improve the quality of the SLO while crafting each aspect of the SLO process, the foundational skill, the ISP, and the TSP. The appraisers will use this tool as they review the SLO for approval. So it's important that teachers refer to this as they write their SLO. A copy of the SLO Success Criteria has been provided in your SLO handout.
And let's stop right there. So we just heard 2.5 minutes of a lot of information, okay? The SLO is a three-step process. The SLO process is a three-step process where number one, you create the SLO. And if you've already taught a year, you've already done that. You progress monitor the SLO, which means you give a test every 6 weeks to see how the kids are progressing in the SLO. And then finally, you rate the SLO, which is where you indicate whether the kid did not meet your expectation, met your expectation, or exceeded your expectation. So let's talk about the acronyms we first heard. The first thing we talked about was the foundational skill. What is that and why is that important? What is the SLO foundational skill? It is a text-based statement that says what? Why do you have to write a foundational skill first? What does that do to the SLO? It gives you the parameters of the SLO. You must always start with a foundational skill because here, what if I said this? I would like for you to improve your entire curriculum. And you have a year to improve. And then I want to get it tested every 6 weeks. Is that fair to you, first of all? No, that's not, and it's not going to be effective. But if I said to you, what do you teach me? Pre-K? If I said to you, this is a pre-K teacher, and I said, I would like for you to work on letter sound correspondence so that we can begin blending to create words. Do you work on letter sound correspondence throughout the year? By the end of the year, are you trying to blend and create some kind of word? So that makes the foundational skill, compresses curriculum to see what it is you're going to test. It makes it personal to the teacher because they're the ones that's going to have to track this. Remember, the SLO is all about the teacher. It does say, by the way, what does SLO stand for? Student Learning Objective. But the SLO is actually a teacher effective assessment tool. The teacher measures whether or not they're being effective through the lens of who? The student. But at the end of the day, it's all about who? The teacher. The SLO is about the teacher. That's why the teacher picks the parameters of the SLO. So in order to pick the parameter or the scope of the SLO, you have to write what statement? What do we call it? Foundational skill statement. That sets the what? The stage. That sets the view. That sets the everything. If our foundational skill statement is not written correctly, or we choose the wrong teach or the wrong skill, then our SLO is going to kind of fall apart. So let me ask you this. Does the state provide guidance on what that statement should look like or what it should include? The answer is yes. And it gives that to you in the SLO success criteria, which is one of our vocabulary words were. I'm going to put it up on the board for you. When your appraisers talk to you about the SLO, they're going to talk to you in the language of the SLO success criteria. And what's really great about the SLO success criteria is that it tells you exactly what should be expected at every phase of the SLO. So here we go. For the foundational skill, how many items does the state expect to see? I have it there on the board. 5. When you craft your foundational skill, you're going to check for 5 things. Number 1, does it represent a foundational skill that is specific to the content area? Here's what that means. This teacher told me she was a pre-K teacher. Okay, her SLO I said could be based on phonemic awareness in order to create letter sound correspondence to begin to blend words together. If her SLO had been about music, would we have a problem already? Yes, because it's not specific to her what? Content area. Mr. Stefano, right?
Yes.
What grade do you teach? You get me money?
7th grade.
7th grade ELAR. If she wrote an SLO based on scientific inquiry, would it pass the first benchmark? No. The first thing that your SLO, that foundational skill, has to focus on is it specific to your content area? All right, so check that one out. Okay. Is my SLO specific to me? If I'm a math teacher, am I doing a history one? And probably the answer is what? You're probably going to get that one right? CTE, I see a CTE teacher. What do you teach them?
Engineering.
Engineering. Kind of a wide array of things, right? Is it the first level, second level, or are you drafting, what are we doing?
All of them.
All levels? Okay. So this year, what did you pick? Which class did you pick to focus on?
The civil class.
The which one?
Civil engineering.
Civil engineering, good. What is one skill that is that's specific to your course that would not be specific to another engineering course, and maybe like 3D printing?
For them to learn how to actually use the Revit program, the software,
How to use the software? Great. In order to create what?
to create a residential house.
A what?
Residential house.
Got it. Your foundational skill. What is the skill I'm going to use, and how am I going to use it? I'm going to use my skill of a phonemic awareness in order to create letter-sound correspondence to be able to blend words together. I will use the software known as
Revit.
Revit in order to create specs so students can begin to do what with it?
Create a residential.
Create a residential layout. Okay. What do you teach them?
PE,
PE. Great. What level?
elementary.
Elementary. Okay. Good. So I kind of gave you all a training 2 years ago, right? Or I think it was 2 years, or a year ago. And we said there were 7 strands of PE, right? So you can focus on movement, right? Movement patterns. Students will use their knowledge of movement patterns to do what? In order to create lifelong healthy choices when it comes to exercise patterns. Okay. So again, number 1, it must be specific to your content area. Number 2, this is the most important one. What does number 2 say? Persists throughout the course. That's a tough one. If you cannot test this until the second semester, then that is not going to be a good SLO. Because you're going to have to wait until January to begin giving tests on whether or not the kids are meeting your expectation. But when do we start giving tests for the SLO? What, 6 weeks? Every 6 weeks, right off the bat. You get a baseline in the first 6 weeks, you do second, you do third, you do fourth, you do fifth. So you cannot pick a skill that you're going to teach in the second semester. You've got to pick a skill that we get right off the bat in the first 6 weeks. And that should really guide most of your foundational skill. You're setting parameters, or you're picking a skill that you know you're going to hit from day one. Are you already working on letters on correspondence? Yes, because you're already showing what? Letters. Okay. What I know, Ms. Stefano, one of her SLOs last year was they're going to use a race strategy in order to do short constructed responses. Is she probably already writing? Yes, from day one. So if your foundational skill is not being addressed until after October, let's go back and revamp. So the state already said 2 things: specific to your content area and persist throughout the course. Number 3, measurable through a demonstration of student skill. All that means is this: can you test it? Can you give a test to the kids to see whether or not they can show you that skill? Okay, one PE coach said they wanted to do dribbling. Great, dribbling in terms of what, basketball? Or dribbling in terms of what, soccer? Okay, but they have to dribble or move or run with something in order to play their what? Sport, right? And dribble can go to any sport. All right, so again, is it measurable? Can you give a test? Can you see the foundational skill either being mastered or not being mastered? Number 4, focus on it will lead to student and teacher growth in this course and beyond. Let's talk about that. Pre-K teacher, working on letter-sound correspondence. Will that lead to growth in current years and beyond? Yes, we start blending words. We create what? Sentences. We start learning how to read sentences, and then we begin comprehension. We begin comprehension, and then that leads to inference, and so forth and so on. So her work as a pre-K teacher to work on letter-sound correspondence to begin blending is super important to the student, not only in her year, but where? The rest of their time in life, probably, right? So you have to think, is this skill that I'm capturing, is it worth my time? And is it worth the time of the teacher after me? Okay? Being healthy, movement patterns, is that going to be important after elementary?
Yes.
Or they'll end up like this, right? But yes, movement patterns is very important so they don't get hurt when they play football or volleyball in junior high. And then even tougher when they go to what? High school or even college. So when you pick your foundational skill, is it specific to your content area? Does it persist throughout the entire year? Meaning, can you start testing it right away the first 6 weeks? Can you measure it? Can you give a test to see whether or not the kid is getting it or not getting it? And most importantly, Will they grow you and will they grow the kid, not only in your year, but the years what? To come. Is it worth it? Number 5, the skills captured are clearly defined and appropriately focused and aligned to the state standards. And like Ms. Barrera was saying earlier, it's TEKS based. So yes, it is TEKS based. It has to appear somewhere in the TEKS. Can it be more than one TEK? Absolutely. Should it be about 10 TEKs? No. That means it's then too what? Too broad. You gotta bring it in low. Okay? So when you craft your foundational skill, if you've not done it, or when you do it on Saturday, how many items are you gonna take? How many items do you have to test it through? 5. And it's listed in what criteria? Says right here. The SLO success criteria. You have to, whenever you work on your SLO, this needs to be like your handy sheet next to you. Like, it's kind of like you know how when you have your key and your grading papers, this is your key. You need to have this with you at all times so you can check, see what you're doing. Okay, so we picked up foundational skill. It's worth it. It's going to lead to success here and beyond. I'm really happy about it. It's going to make me better as a teacher. It's going to make the kid better as a student. Let's go. What's the second step? You write your foundational skill, and then you begin to work on which 2 things? The initial skill profile and the TSP. So let's talk about that. We're going to talk about writing the ISP and writing the TSP. We call those rubrics, right? Do we use rubrics in everyday life? Absolutely. When you go to a restaurant, in your head you have a rubric. What was the service like? Did the food take long? Was the food cold? Was it good? Right? How did it look around the restaurant? When you go watch a movie, do you have a rubric in your mind? Absolutely. Was there a plot? Was there a beginning, end, and middle? Was it music? Well, at least was the music good? Was cinematography good? All that good stuff, right? We use rubrics and everything, and SLOs are based on rubrics. I have a question for you. Why do you think the state asks us to come up with our own rubric? Why do you think the state does that? Because the state doesn't give us a rubric. We have to do it ourselves. But why do they do that? Pre-K, high school, LAR, PE. Everybody is what? Different. The state cannot it could if they wanted to pay someone or pay a company to come up with an SLO for every course that the state has to offer. But just think in BISD how many courses there are. Okay, a lot. Okay. The other reason why we have to write our own rubrics is because we have different levels of what? Students. Will a teacher who teaches resource have the same verbiage of a rubric as a teacher who doesn't have resource kids? No. The rubrics are what? Different because they're tailored to that student what? Population. Same thing for AP. AP physics, regular physics. Should the rubric be the same? No, because you're addressing a different type, not a different type, but a different level of what? Student, right? So the state says, you know what? We cannot possibly cover all the courses. Moreover, we cannot possibly predict what type of mix of students this teacher is going to have. So the state says, as long as you have how many levels? 5. Well below typical, typical, above typical, well above typical, and you tier the skill and create a rubric, we'll let you use that. So we start with a foundational skill, now we move on to our ISP and TSP. What is the major difference between the ISP rubric and a TSP rubric? What are the major differences, or what is the major difference? ISP deals with what? Beginning. Before the kid even steps foot into your what? Classroom. Okay? And the TSP is a description of the student what? At the end. What do you expect to happen after 160 days of being in your classroom? Now, just like the state gave us a rubric to grade the foundational skill, it also gives us a rubric to grade the ISP. Uh-oh.
Sorry about that. It has to.
Again, I'm telling you nothing new. Maybe just explain a little different, but everything that we talked about today, you've been getting since day one. All right, your ISP. Oh, go ahead.
I think I get confused, because I teach life skills at a middle school, and I teach the 7th and 8th graders. I decided to do math, because to me, it's a lot easier for me to see growth or see what the students are doing.
Okay.
But I use like everybody's different, whether it be using manipulatives or a calculator or whatever.
Correct.
So everything, and some of them are just like totally like 1 and 1, 10 over 10 and stuff like that. So I get confused when I do.
The rubric, right.
The rubric, because, I mean, so many kids are, how do I measure them to be above, or well above typical,
Right.
when they're like so low?
Remember that this is specific to your population. So if well above typical for you means hand over hand sorting, then that's well above typical. If typical is hand over hand color matching, then that's typical for you. Use your experience to say, you know what, I hate to say it like this, but the highest level I could ever get a kid to was just to sort the pennies out. Not even count them. Just say, this looks brown, that looks white, and all I could do was just move them and sort them by color. And that's the best math they could do. Or you could say, I'm not a life skills expert, but could you put a nickel down and say, okay, give me 3 pennies, and then you give them, and you convert it 3 to 5 pennies, and could he or she give you 3? Is that well above typical?
With assistance.
Then, okay, so then again, tailor to your experience. Do not think that in 6th grade, a math kid's gonna be doing equations and balancing equations. Our kids, in life skills, we know that. And that's okay. So
I guess
again,
I was trying to match what teak to put it under, what you use, it's like,
remember, the TEAK and the rubric are different. So if the TEAK is counting, okay, your rubric is gonna be mentioning, it could be, it's so scaffolded down that you're just not even counting, you're just even sorting to try and get to a number. Okay, you're creating a pattern just to even get to the counting. And counting could be 10 steps above where they're at. Because I know there's no life skill TEAK, it's just a math TEAK, right? So don't worry too much about the TEAK that you're following it, because we know you're a life skills teacher. Worry that the 5 levels of the ISP are actually tiered so that you can see 5 distinct levels. Hand over hand, major assistance, hand over hand with assistance, can do it by themselves, but doesn't use owner grasps to move things around, things of that nature. Okay, so don't be afraid to just bring it. Whatever level you need to bring it to.
because I thought they needed to be like, okay, like, they're doing this, and they need to show me that they're actually doing without, you know what I mean?
And as far as the life skills goes, even if they meet their IEP, the IEP could be still with assistance in hand over hand, right? Another thing we kind of went over today, I was at Russell, is think of the test the way you give the test. That could be well above typical. Like you show a picture and you read it to them, and then you kind of help them with, you do what you do with the test, right? So that could be well above typical, and then well below typical would be you completely doing the test for them. So think of it that way. But just don't get too hooked on, this is my TEAK, but I'm not even addressing my TEAK because the skill is so far apart.
Well, I kind of found myself in the same situation last year because I teach resource writing for 3rd to 5th. And I think what she means is difficult to, I guess, generalize the TEAK where you'll still be able to assess all your students, but then the rubric itself would be unfair for some than others because of their abilities.
Right.
So I think that's what I found more difficult was, I don't wanna like overrate everyone because I'm trying to be, like bring their rubric a little lower for my students who are more privileged.
Right. And then remember that not only do you write the rubric, but then you set, and what you set around, you set the level. So for some kids, the kid's not gonna move levels at all. For other kids, it may even bump up. Remember, you still get credit for kids that stay that way.
And I'm just.
No,
I'm just
we're
throwing this
talking,
out there.
yeah.
Our administrator that looks through our SLO
Mhm.
will be aware, they're not gonna be like.
I will tell you this, whatever training they have, I went through as well. So whatever comes out of my mouth should hopefully, and if you feel like you still need more support, please feel free to reach out. Okay, everyone, not only you, but including me, we're also going through the process. So,
Because I'm just trying to follow what everybody else in campus is
right.
doing, but it's hard for me to look, I can't do that. Like,
At the end of the day, as long as you create a rubric and you're able to rate the students, that's what matters.
Okay.
How you write those rubrics, that's your choice. Good question. All right, so ISP. What is it that we're looking at when we see the ISP? Number one, this is articulated skills for the beginning of the year. So if we're talking about in elementary, we're talking about multiplication and division. Does a teacher start off right away with multiplication and division at their very first day? No, they scaffold and start with what? Addition and what? Subtraction. So the ISP, even though the foundational skill is they're going to be multiplying and dividing, at the beginning of the year, they haven't had a chance to teach multiplication and division. The beginning of the year's rubric should talk about addition and what? Subtraction. Okay. Number two, does it differentiate between skill levels? If I look at the typical skill level and I look at the above typical, is there a difference? Okay. Number three, are the descriptors aligned to the skill statement? Okay. If the foundational skill is music, but I'm talking about decoding, that is music coding, but I'm talking about PE, but then I'm thinking about the scientific method and talking about investigation, they're not aligned to that. Number four, can it be assessed in multiple ways? Other than giving a multiple choice test, could you still test that SLO in another way? Could it be an exit? Could it be a fill in the blank? Okay, think of the STAR 2.0 questions. Could it be done that way? And is it based on multiple sources of evidence? And this is the most important one. What does that last part say for the ISP? On number 5, what is that? What are those last two words? Whose experience? Your own experience. What have you seen before come through your classroom? Okay, so that being said, if you're a first year teacher, you cannot do this alone. If you're a first year teacher, you must buddy up with someone because this does require you to have what? Experience. You need to know how the kids have come to you before you get to them. Now, try not to dwell too much on the pandemic. Yes, we're definitely still in it. We still have non-readers in various multiple grade levels. We still have kids who have large gaps. But we're starting to close those gaps little by little. So when you think of teacher's experience, don't go and think pandemic experience, but like, what were you getting before the pandemic? And can we push more towards that? Okay, so that is a criteria for the ISP. Their TSP has how many different things you're looking for? This one's a little different. This one has 6. Number 1, does it articulate skills to the end of the year? Does it differentiate between skill levels? Is the typical, well above typical, and well below typical, are they the same? Are they different? How are they different? Are the descriptors aligned to the skill statement? Again, if we're talking about math, but you're talking about scientific inquiry inside your rubric, that's not aligned. Can they be assessed in multiple ways? Are targets specific to students in the teacher's classroom and based on multiple sources of evidence? Okay. Now, what does that mean? When you set a TSP target, is it purely based on your first test, which is your baseline? No. Remember, what do you do the first 6 weeks? You give a test and you set the what?
Bar.
The baseline. You set the bar. We call that the ISP, right? You set the rubric, you rate the ISP, we call that mapping. But then immediately after setting the baseline, you set the what? The target. Immediately. I'm not talking like the same day. I'm talking like you click 3 dots and then you're immediately going to go and click the TSP target. Okay? Other than the test that you have, what can you use to help you gauge that target? Your what of the student? Expectations, your experience with them. By the way, I don't know if you remember this, but school started August 14th, right? The deadline to give the district your TSP rating is not until September the 29th. It gives you a whole what? 6 weeks to get to know the group. Get to know the student. What do you mean by that, Camarillo? Well, does he come to school every day? Does he ask questions? Is he or she engaged in my lesson? Because
We have a deadline to turn in the SLO.
okay, so that's a great question. Your first actual deadline is actually next Friday, and that's to turn in your SLO if you're starting from scratch. And then the 8th, your deadline is created in Eduphoria, meaning you're going to get all this information and type it inside Eduphoria or copy last year's SLO and put it in Eduphoria. But the actual rating of the purple dots does not happen until the 29th of September. So you have to set it up beforehand, because we kind of want you to start thinking about it, right? Because if you don't have it written, do you know how you're gonna test it? No, which means you probably don't have a baseline. So we want you to already have an idea of what you're doing, what the ISPs are, and the TSP is, and how you're gonna test it. So that's why we have you create it first. But the actual purple dots and rating and TSP mapping, the TSP rating doesn't happen until September 29th. Good question. So how many weeks do you have to get to know the kid? 6 weeks. Okay. And I'm not afraid to tell you this, because this is the whole push for this year for Brownsville ISD. We want you to feel comfortable setting a higher target. This is why we're allowing you to copy which one? Last year's SLO, because you already have experience with the SLO. You've kind of given tests on it, you see how kids react to it. Now you're able to better see how the kids kind of do data-wise. So with that being said, we're gonna let you copy it so that you feel a little more comfortable setting the target a little what? Higher. Now, are we gonna go from well below typical to above typical? No. But at least consider moving up what? 1 dot. At least consider moving up 1 dot. All right. So again, based on multiple sources of evidence, attendance, prior testing data, your own experience the first 6 weeks of the kid, and finally number 6, does the TSP target represent or reflect high yet reasonable expectations for student growth? Is it reasonable for us to expect as a district to go from below typical to typical, which is just 1 dot movement? It is, unless there's of course an underlying one. Right, underlying factor. And of course, if there is an underlying factor, is that completely fair to say? Yes, but in that case, you start the RTI process and we go from there, right? And of course, we intervene and we do our interventions as teachers. Okay, so we've written our foundational skill. We know what we're gonna test. We know what we're gonna work on. Then we wrote our ISP rubrics and our TSP rubrics. We know that we're gonna have how many levels of students? 5 different levels. At the beginning, you're gonna have to rate either below typical, well below typical, typical, above typical, well above typical. And then as soon as you give a baseline, you have to give a what? As soon as you click at the baseline, you have to click the target. Do not click on the target in May, that's cheating. But the whole premise of the SLO is that you get a baseline, and with your 6 weeks of experience with the student, you're gonna say, I can get Emiliano here, which is hopefully 1 dot above where he was before. Now, if they're already at 5 dots, can you go above that? No. So 5 dots, of course, goes to 5 dots. Okay? Now, let me ask you this. If 95% of your kids are coming in at 5 dots, what's the problem? The ISP is too what? Easy. The ISP is written too easy. That means the skills that you chose to write your ISP, even though valuable, but were too easy and the kids already got there. That means any goal you set is going to be reached. So then you make your ISP what? Harder. That's the premise of this. Okay, so foundational skill, ISP, TSP, and then we do those deadlines. Go ahead.
The first deadline is the first.
First deadline is September 1st.
And the second deadline?
September 8th.
And that's for?
Okay, that's a great question. So September 1st is for the people who are starting from scratch. If you got moved to a different grade level, if you got moved to a different grade level or you're teaching a different subject, you've got to go back to this phase of the SLO process, which is starting from scratch and creating the SLO on the Texas form. If you're teaching the same subject and you're going to copy the previous year's SLO, which is what we really want you to do, then your deadline is September the 8th. That means you're going to copy it in Eduphoria and create a new version of it that applies to this year. I just released the instructions to your appraisers. They should have emailed them to you today or sometime tomorrow. Hopefully on Saturday I'll be here with you. So for those of you who want to copy it, I'll copy it for you, basically. But in those instructions, it does take about 5 minutes to copy. It's not very intensive, but if you know what you're doing, it takes even less than that. So that's kind of our goal. So September the 1st, for those of you that are starting from scratch, and September the 8th, for those of you who are just going to copy it within the program. Yes?
So when you say copy, like word for word, everything?
Correct. I'm going to show you where to click to copy. It's going to literally make a copy. And it does I separate the copying into 3 steps. Number 1 is we copy the SLO, which is the strive section, and then we copy the aware section, which is the section with the purple dots. That's completely different from the SLO. So we copy the SLO and strive, which is where you put the evidence. Then we copy the student portfolio, which is where we put the purple dots. And then I showed you how to add your current students to your old SLO.
So when we copy, it, we're able to edit
Oh, absolutely.
and then just go from there.
Absolutely.
Do we have to edit it, or can we just do it?
That's a great question. Here's the instructions I gave to the appraisers, because I did give them instructions. If your SLO came in at 100% growth, meaning none of your kids were in the red, I said you would have to redo your TSP rubrics. Because that means that that's not hard enough. It wasn't challenging enough for your kids. They all met your goal, which is a good thing, right? But to get where the whole purpose and the heart of the SLO, let me show you what the state expects. This is another item your appraiser should give me. This is the SLO teacher rubric. There's distinguished, accomplished, and proficient. Is proficient rock solid? The T-test, is proficient rock solid? Yes. Are you a rock star teacher? Absolutely. Do we want you hired? Absolutely. You're doing what you're supposed to do. You're amazing. You teach kids learn. But look what the state says about a proficient teacher in terms of their SLO. Approximately, let's read together in 3, 2, 1. Approximately half of the students meet their expectations. That means that a proficient teacher will have half of their kids in red and half of their kids in the blue-green section. That's how rigorous the state expects your SLO to be written at. And if you want to know in writing, this is where it is in writing. And this is coming from the state. Okay, and it's called the SLO teacher rubric rating, or rating rubric, sorry. So, you asked me, sir, do I have to edit it? The answer is going to be, if it came in 100%, I gave that list to your appraisers. They're going to talk to you individually. If they talk to you individually, then we are going to ask that you review the TSP. If you're not 100%, it's a clean copy.
So if you got 100%, wouldn't you have to change also the initial skill profile too?
You would need to set the target higher. That means that the previous year, if your TSP is written rigorously enough, that means that the target that you set was a little too low. So we want you to bump up the dots, which is why we're trying to get everyone to go at least up.
But if you just dropped it and it was already high enough and it just did really well. I mean,
I completely, and it's a fair question.
not that I.
No.
To me, right?
No.
I'm just saying.
It's a fair question. And
I'm asking for a friend.
so, I will tell you this, my job with the district is the TIA coordinator. And we did not get TIA last year because our SLO scores were very inflated according to the state. So when we met with the state, Dr. Renfro and I met with the state and said, well, we're an A district. Look at our schools. They're mainly A's. Look at all the growth our teachers experienced. Our kids came back for the first time in 2 years. Of course, we're going to knock it out of the ballpark, right? The state said, I'm going to be honest, we don't care. We need to fit within the literature of what we know of SLOs. And what we know of SLOs is that a rock solid teacher only has half of their kids meeting expectations.
Wow. So basically, that's like their standard of
That is-
being at the SLO.
So they're not rock solid star scores where they met everything and they were in the 90s and, you know, like,
Basically, since we did too good, we cheated.
We have met, and all I can say is, I met multiple times with them, and they want us to stay within the literature of expected growth. And within the literature of expected growth, it's 50% is
But don't be too good on it.
rock solid. So they expect very rigorous targets and SLOs. Trust me, we went to bat for you guys many times last semester when we got our answer for TIA. And we showed them the data, and we tried to appeal, but the way TIA is written in statute, there is no appeal process. But we still tried anyway. Doesn't hurt, right? All they can say is no. And they said no.
So we're punished for being too good.
yeah.
So, yeah. So my job is to make sure the SLO scores come where? Down. Now, all the way down? No. You still have to show what? There has to be growth. Rock solid is 50%. To get TIA, you have to be at 55%. What does that mean? 55% blue-green, 45% red. To be exemplary, 60% blue-green, 40% red. Highest level of TIA is master, 70% blue-green, 30% red.
Is that in writing?
That isn't right.
Can you send it?
Yes, absolutely. We call it the state, it's called, according to TIA, it's called the state standards. And I can show you where it is on the TIA website. Yes. No, but
So say that like my kiddos, let's say it's some of them that are just, I shouldn't say not getting it, but do they stay the same?
great question.
They're just,
The SLO process is this. If a kid is 1 dot at the beginning of the year, and you set their target at 1 dot at the end of the year, do we give you credit for that? Yes, they're green, expected growth.
because they.
That means it counts in your green and blue bucket. So even those kids that nonverbal, blink their eyes maybe, you can still get credit for it. Yes. So, great questions. We wrote our SLO, we wrote our ISP, we wrote our TSP. Now we're gonna put it in Eduphoria. After that, then you give a test every what? 6 weeks. You put in the rating, well below typical, well above typical. And then at the end, you calculate student growth. Last year, we averaged out the ISP, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, 6 weeks. We divided by 5. That gave us our EOY rating, right? Remember, the TSP rating is our what? Prediction or our facts? It's a target. It's a prediction, right? When you set a TSP, you are predicting that this student will achieve this. Your EOY rating is what actually happened. You have evidence backed up to rate the student at that level. Then we compare. Was the EOY rating higher, the same, or below your prediction? And that's where we come with above typical, met expectation, did not meet expectation, or exceed expectation. Yes.
I know there was a formula, right, last.
Yes. Added everything up and then divide by 5.
So let me ask another question.
Yes.
For the initial, is there something that we can base it on, or just us?
That's a great question. It should be based on a what?
Test.
It should be based on a test. Everyone should have given at least one piece of evidence or gathered one piece of evidence for the baseline. Okay, so yes, it must
Could
be.
it be the start test? On a
It
scale
could.
that they.
It could. The only thing is that here's the problem with using just scores. Let's say you got a kid who was meets, okay, but it doesn't tell you what part of the skill that they're good at or what skill that they're lacking. That's why we want to give you a test so that we want to give them a test so that we can test their thinking process now versus just know that the kid got a 20 or a 25.
Well, when you go on to Temple Trends, it
Mhm.
breaks it down for you,
Mhm.
down to the T's, and you can see what child got which one wrong
Mhm.
over and over. That's what I was
Absolutely. So here's another thing. Let's talk math real quick. If a kid gets the answer right, we don't know if it was luck or the kid got it right because we cannot see their what. So we can't grade what process, the thinking process. Which is why I really, whenever I go to a campus, I preach that you can give one multiple choice test. That's no problem. But your other pieces of evidence really need to be different to show the thinking process. Because that's what's important here. Because if you tiered the skill correctly, you actually tiered the thinking process. This kid is having trouble at this level because he cannot do this particular skill. If it's in math, maybe they can set up the equation, but they don't know how to regroup numbers, and that's where they went wrong. Maybe they can't even set up the equation correctly. Maybe they can do the equation, they can solve the equation, but they use the wrong information from the word problem. So you won't know unless you see the actual student work, which is why give one multiple choice test for one of them, but you gotta grade the thinking process for the rest.
So the evidence must be
Student work, absolutely.
handwritten student work.
It is recommended. Yes,
On your rubric, you need to be able to see, just because I got a multiplication question wrong, it doesn't mean I don't know multiplications. Maybe I wasn't paying attention, maybe I was distracted, maybe, so you need to be able to see at what point of the process is a student wrong.
and the other thing is
Yeah,
that,
we were told that we could turn in one piece of evidence, just
great question. So
as an example.
real transparency here, real transparency. We started SLOs in 2017, we started a different version. That version had percentages and that version had, we didn't even write it this way, okay? It looked the same, but it was said differently. It didn't have any calculation and growth. Then in 2019, TIA came about And the state said, okay, we're gonna do SLOs this way so that we can get a percentage for TIA. But then what happened in 2019, 2020? The COVID happened. So we started the process, but we never what? Finished. The next year, what happened again? COVID, we didn't go through the process. So the first time anyone in the state or even BISD actually finished the TIA version of the SLO was 2 years ago. So you all were so overwhelmed. Oh, I don't know if you're a teacher, but the teachers were so overwhelmed, as rightly they would be, getting the kids back. How could we say at the end of the process, oh no, go through your stacks of paper if my student worked for them for 6 weeks? We'll kill it, right? So at that year, we said, just give us one blank sample that proves that you gave any what? Test. But now that they have someone in place like me to say, here's what you really need, now it's fair to say, no, we want one piece of evidence for every 6 weeks, because the SLO is evidence-based, and the state says you must have 5 pieces of student work to back up your student growth score. Per child.
So 26 times 5.
Correct. Now, the answer is absolutely. That being said, can you combine files into one mega file and just upload that one mega file? Absolutely. You don't need to upload things 26 times. But yes, if we were to get audited by the state, let's say we get TIA this year, which is hoping, the state says, BIC, we want to make sure you do the SLO correctly. I'm going to turn over the Eduforia file. And the Eduforia file has to show that there was a foundational skill, it was teach-based, and you all collected what? Evidence. And it wasn't just random ... Because it's what? A lot. We're talking $50 million over 5 years. That's a lot of money. So it has to be evidence-based. Yes?
Going back to the 50/50 proficiency.
Mhm.
So let's just say half the students, you initial 3 dots, and then at the end of year, 3 dots, half the students, right? So they met.
Mhm.
And then the other half, they want to see 3 dots initial, and then at the end of year, 2 dots.
So
Is that correct?
I'm going to give you the PC answer because I'm on Facebook. We have to implement the SLO the way it was meant to be. You set a baseline, and after you set the baseline, you set a what? Target. And if your TSP is written rigorously enough, and if your body of evidence is true, rigorous, hard work that you're giving the students, the law of the bell curve will automatically go in place, which means a majority of the kids are going to land where? In the middle.
Above,
Right. And the other half are going to land where?
below
On the other side.
Below the initial.
Right. So what they're going after is the law of the bell curve, which is what we have in education. These kids are going to always, not all, okay, these kids are going to score low regardless of who's in front of them. These kids are going to score high regardless of who's in front of them. And these kids are affected by who's in front of them.
So my question is, they're gonna, at the end of half of them at the end of the year are gonna score below the target, right?
According to the law of the
Yes,
bell curve, yes,
exactly.
yes.
Okay,
Half of them will not meet their target.
yes.
But for TIA, 55% must meet their target. 60 and then 70, but not 100. Because we need this, because in education, that's just, literature says that's how it is. There's a bell
Should
curve.
become suspicious, I guess, if it's on the other end where all your kids met target and just to,
They-
well, not only maybe was it easy, but maybe like some other.
And what they
question.
said is that we had to, what the feedback that we got from the state, because we did meet with them, is that we need to train our teachers, and this is from them, to set higher targets, not to be afraid to set rigorous targets, which is why they said, even the rubric says only half the kids at a proficient level teacher are gonna reach the target. Because that's what fits in the literature.
And when you say $50 million over 5 years.
That's because last year, like, had we gotten TIA last year, with the amount of teachers we would have designated, they would have generated $10 million. And that 10 million would have been guaranteed for 5 years of 10 million, 10 million, 10 million.
As long as the teacher.
Remains a teacher,
So if the teacher retires?
then it stops. That's a great question. It's meant to keep our warriors in the classroom. If the teacher goes to be a counselor, it stops also. If the teacher goes to be a principal, it stops. This grant is meant to keep all teachers inside the classroom. Because at the end of the day, doesn't matter if administration is good, What affects student success is the person who's in front of them all the time.
So, scenario,
Mhm.
a teacher this year is retiring at the end in May.
Great question.
It's not gonna work for her.
Correct. So there's a couple,
Financially speaking.
correct. There's a couple of rules. We capture the data 1 year, and you have to be employed with the same district the following year to designate. So if a teacher retires at the end of this year, then we don't send them for designation. If a teacher goes to Los Fres, like another district next year, we don't go for designation because they're still not part of, they have to stay with us. Now, once we capture the data and then they get designated, then that third year, they leave us. The
That's
money.
my point, so if she already knows that she's retiring.
Mhm.
So,
Remember that we talked about the SLO as a what tool?
yes.
As a
For
teacher
the-
growth, as a teacher what?
For the,
As a teacher growth tool. TIA is just a kind of, this is a carrot, not a carrot, but this is a little bonus that we're gonna do. Because you have to do it anyway. Regardless of TIA, we have to do SLOs and we have to do T-tests here in Brownsville. So regardless of that pot of money. So, we still have to go through the process. So even though, this teacher is retiring, because they're employed by by law, chapter 150, they must be evaluated and they must have a student growth score. Even if the following year. There. Great questions. Yeah.
Okay, so, it's easy when it's a multiple choice test, you know where they stand. So with the body of evidence, they want a rubric with that, right? With every body of evidence, there needs to be a rubric, or
No, no, because your rubric is your what? Your TSP and your,
no, I'm grading the body of evidence for each student.
right, that's why you have that's why you create the rubric. You grade it based on that.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, whether or not the kid, okay, so let me give you an example. I'm doing a math SLO test. The teacher says in her rubric, without assistance, with assistance, with manipulatives, without manipulatives, a student does this. If I get 100, but I get 100 because the teacher helped me, I can't go above the level where they said without what? Assistance. So even though my grade's 100, I cannot be well above typical because I required what? Assistance. If I needed to use a manipulative like a multiplication chart, and I got 100, I got 105, I got the bonus question. But because I got help, I can't go above the level where it said with manipulatives. That's why numbers really, which is why they changed the 2017 version. Because the 2017 version was this, well below typical, 0 to 20. Below typical, 20 to 40. 40 to 60, 60 to 80, 80 to 100. That was the old version. But then they're like, wait, that doesn't work out because what if the kid got help? What if the kid used manipulatives? Which is okay because it's written because like her students, they need help, right? So, and it's okay to use that. So that's why you have to test what the rubric says. And yeah, which is why I really don't recommend multiple choice for more than one because you have to grade. And if you give the kid help, no problem, but you have to put it on there with what? Manipulatives, with assistance. Which is why I would not recommend putting your body of evidence into your grade book. Because if you put it into your grade book as a test grade, by law, you have to what? Reteach and what? Retest. And remember, you're testing here's a question for you all. When do you start testing the TSP rubric? What point in the year does the TSP rubric start already?
After the first 6 weeks.
After the first 6 weeks. So if your goal was my kid's gonna read on grade level, or my kids are gonna start reading words, she's gonna have to give them an opportunity to show that they can start reading words starting which 6 weeks. But the kids are very like, they're not even blending it. So let me ask you this. Should you see a dip in the data starting the second 6 weeks?
You should.
It should dip down because you haven't had a chance to what? Finish teaching. And then you slowly see that. So data should do this baseline, dip, not like floor dip, but it should dip 1 dot and then start rising because you had a chance to teach. So, great conversations. Well worth the subway.
Well worth it.
Woo!
It's just, honestly, I hear, I'm staff at TSA, and I hear so much of concern with this. How teachers feel like so you know, under so much pressure for, with this. And it's, I don't know how, I mean, you make it sound like it's 1, 2, 3, right? Really simple, but
There
I
are,
don't know when they will get to a level where they feel like, I got this.
which is why we're gonna start, and with the, of course, with the superintendent's permission, who was all for it, we're gonna start letting them copy the same one, because they're gonna start refining every aspect of it now. The year before, cause I read them all, they weren't where they had to be. Last year, they did a really good job. So I feel comfortable telling the super, let them start here now, and let's start refining this set, because this set was pretty good. So now we're working on the rubrics. This conversation we just had, we could not have had 3 years ago. No, and it's just like anything, we're starting somewhere and then we're slowly refine every bit. So in 2 years, we're gonna be like, you all can do the training.
So for Saturday, for Saturday, would you prefer they bring their computer?
Yes, absolutely. Especially if they're gonna copy it, it would be best to bring their laptop.
Yes, thank you, guys.
For the others, can I ask for a friend? So, they were asking if something aside from the multiple choice, you mentioned
An exit ticket?
projects or anything else aside from the multiple choice?
Anything that is a demonstration of student skills. Anything. Okay, here's where, you also need to play the math game. So if you're grading the thinking process, which is grading the whole work and everything, then no problem. But if you're giving the kid a 1 question exit ticket, it's either 100 or it's a what? 0. So giving an exit ticket is great, but how about giving an open-ended question versus solve this, no problem, or why is this equation like this? Yes, go ahead.
So,
All
what
right.
if, alright, so sometimes, because of what I teach, I observe a lot. And so, how could I put in?
Great question. So I was a,
evidence of observing, like, I saw this student doing this in accordance to what I set out to do.
so my background is actually music. I was a band director back in the day. So that's what I did. Mine were, every Friday I would give a test. But my tests were, I had to listen to the piece and I had to observe what they were doing. So I created a rubric. So one of my rubric was, how is the kid sitting? That was 5 points. How is the kid holding the instrument? That's another 5 points. Were they playing the right music? Another 5 points. Were they going too fast or too slow? Another 5 points. So you create a rubric, a rubric based on numbers. And on your observation, if I see the kid doing this, I'm gonna give him 4 points. If I only see half of that, 2. So that's why Mr. Sedata was saying you have to upload a rubric. If it's observation based, you definitely have to say the kid got a 45, but here's why. He got 2 points for presentation, 3 points for inflection. Well, what do you teach him?
Collision.
No?
Collision.
Okay, great. Awesome. Okay, so 5 points, can they verbally tell you what's wrong with the scenario they see with them? Do they know how to fix it? But knowing how to fix and actually fixing is 2 different things, right? So that could be another part of your rubric. Can they actually do they have the dexterity to fix the problem? So yes, whatever you want to see, just write it in a rubric and assign points to it. If I see this, I give them this many points. If I don't see this, then I don't give them this many points. That's okay. Because that's how people who do, like band directors, that's how they do it. Choir directors, yes.
Let me ask a question. So the same thing with me, like if I have a student,
Mhm.
like say he gazes or whatever
Mhm.
at the answer, and I just put gaze everywhere? Or
Yeah, if your answer
are they
is,
usually actually like a picture, they either look at it or point to it?
yes,
So I would create I guess like an answer sheet
yes,
and just put the answer and I would transcribe it.
right.
So I would put.
5 points for looking at the answer, 6 points for pointing to it, 7 points for trying to verbally say the answer. Right. But then, just don't go too complex because actually what you're doing is actually the rubrics, the TSP rubric. So if that's what you're gonna base everything on, you might as well just write it as a rubric and say like, okay, this kid is constantly eyeing the right answer, and that's typical. The kid is constantly trying to verbalize the right answer, that's above typical. The kid can verbalize the right answer, that's above typical.
Well, because I usually, since we do the STAR all,
Uh-huh.
and they only have 3 options to
Right.
either choose something. They can either point to it, or they tell you the answer, or put A, B, C, and they'll tell you, or point, or, you know. We create a way for them to give us the answer.
Correct.
Or they can be pictures, and they select the pictures. So when I test the kids, I test them the way I'm going to test them
For start
when
writing.
they do the start, because actually training them how to answer so they can give me the correct.
And your rubric should be based on that.
Did you already present all of this that you needed to present?
Yes,
Because I can
yes.
get off if you did, and then we can have a conversation.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm good.
Okay, perfect. All right.
Does
Okay,
that help?
we're done with the presentation.
Yeah.
If anybody can make it on Saturday and needs
Yes.
help with creating
I'm just
them,
confused.
we
I
will
don't
be
know
here
if
at
you
the
use my
library.
clarification.
Bye.
Okay, let's say exit